Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the episode 2 of how to make a FNaF fan game in Clickteam series. Today, we are going to be continuing on our main menu. So, without further ado, we'll just get right into it. We'll go into our menu here. So last we left off, we had made our buttons, our different buttons, new game continues, 6 night, and custom night. But of course, right now they're just kind of part of the UI. They don't really do anything. So we are going to change that. So the first thing I'm going to do is, I'm sure as you know, in FNAF 1, when you hover your mouse over all these buttons, a little arrow appears signifying which button you're hovering over. So we're going to go ahead and make a new string object, which is just going to be our arrow. Now we could always make this as an active object, but since it's literally just an arrow, which we can have as text, we can just have that be a string. So I'm going to just change our font settings here. If you need a reminder on how to do that, it's going to be the text settings option, or actually what is it called? Text options under the properties tab. And change our color. It's actually quite small. Oh, that's actually a different font here. It's Pixel Mix, as a matter of fact. So let's change it to that. This is 28 size. I want to match the font size up a bit here. All right, there we go. So let's see here. The height is okay. So for this specifically, we are going to try to match the heights of these up. So the height here is 68. So what we're going to do is under size and position, we'll also have this be 68. And we'll rename this to arrow. There's multiple ways of doing this, but I'm going to show you guys probably the most efficient way. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to align the Y positions here. That doesn't really matter. It'll just look nicer on the general interface if I do it. So we'll make this like 35. There we go. And set the X position to where it looks right. So about centered where it looks pretty nice. And then if we go over to display options, if you want to have something like this arrow not be visible as soon as the main menu is up, and there's an option for it. You can just deselect visible at start. This will always be on as soon as you make the new object. And this is a weird thing for string objects specifically. It does that whenever you have that option toggled off and it's a string, but it doesn't really matter. All right, and then before we start making our code, we're actually going to go over to our title, and we're not going to do anything with the title specifically, but what we're going to do is, well, actually, you know what? Never mind. We're going to do our background object, actually. Freddy Man is going to be our test subject. So underneath values, we're going to make a new alterable value. These are basically just numbers that are used for all the programming. So if you need a number to be stored or something, then you can just have an alterable value. So before we actually mess with these, we're going to go ahead and make a new one by just pressing this new button. And we'll leave this value at 0 at the beginning because that's actually the value that we want it to be in when we start running. But before we move on, we just want to change the name of this to something else. So we'll call it focus. You can just double click on it. I think you can also just press it and then press F2. Yeah, that works as well. You can go without naming alterable values, but I would not recommend it. It's the same thing with just naming your objects in general. You don't have to, but it's just smart, especially if you have multiple programmers. So it's smart to just have, them be naming stuff if you have multiple people who are going to be programming for the game. So having things be named and sorted is important. So now we're going to go to our event list editor, and we're going to start actually making some code. So before we start implementing anything, I'm going to first show you guys something really cool that I don't think even Scott himself does. So we're going to right click on our next new line here. We're going to hover over insert, and we're going to select a group of events. So basically what we're doing is we are making a group. So we're just going to name our group, which is going to be buttons, since that's what we're doing, and press enter. And voila, here you go. For people who are wondering, this isn't just so that way we can see, we can have segments of code that we know do different things. If you see, we can actually collapse this and have it be more condensed. So if we aren't using this buttons code, we can just make this smaller, and it is a lot more easier to just maneuver around, because trust me, using group coding is very important. This is something that Scott does not do, because if you take a look at his mainline FNaF MFAs, it's all just in one big mess. So basically just imagine, like, lines like these, not quite, but just standard lines, all this. Just imagine that for like 400 plus lines for the office, and that's the coding for the base FNaF games. Very icky. We don't want to do that. We want to actually program good. So we do this. Anyways, we're gonna make a new condition, and since we are checking for if the mouse is over the buttons, we're gonna go over to the mouse pointer and keyboard. Click that. Hover over the mouse, and then click on check for mouse pointer over an object. We get to this screen, and checking for what object we want to check the mouse pointer being over, which is of course going to be our buttons. Alright, and then we are also going to make a new condition on top of that, which if you guys need a reminder, you just right click on the number, which is right next to the line of code that you are currently on, and press add a new condition. That's how you add a new condition on top of the one that you already have. And we are going to go to our background and select compare to one of the alter values, because now we are actually going to be checking for if our focus alter value that we just made is a specific value. So what we're going to do, so this is kind of a new screen. It's a bit overwhelming. Basically, we are checking for what alter value that we want to check for. So of course you have all these currently unnamed values. So this is what I mean when I say you don't need to actually make values, but it is still recommended so that way you can have them be named. So we're going to press focus because that's the one we want to check. And then the comparison method, which can be equal, different, lower or equal, all this stuff. I'm sure you guys probably know what all these do. So we are going to choose different, or we could also choose, yeah, we'll do different. I think it makes more sense. And we're going to keep our text expression down here as 0. So when we press enter, this line ultimately calls for checking if our focus alter value is different than 0 while we are hovering over mouse button. Actually, hang on, I'm sorry. My bad. I did a dum-dum. So not 0, as a matter of fact. So we need to actually select one of these down here. So we're going to press buttons, and we are going to select the button's instance value. Now, as a reminder, the instance values are those values that basically set the paragraphs to their appropriate text as soon as the game loads. Remember, that was the whole thing that we did last episode with having all the same objects actually be displaying different lines of code depending on what their instance values do. Well, we're going to use these again, but this time for the actual mouse over code. Okay, so now that we have this set up, we're going to go ahead and make a new action. And the first thing I'm going to do is go over to our arrow code, hover over visibility, which is checking for if it is visible or invisible, and we're going to make it reappear. And then we're going to right click on the text that we just added. We're going to press, I think adds it below. Again, I am not super well versed in the list editor, but I can use it well enough so that you guys can get a better idea on how everything looks visualized. We're going to select arrow again. We're going to hover over position because we don't want to just make it reappear. We want to actually set it equal to the position of the button that we were hovering over. So we could just press select position and stuff, but instead, since the X position does not change, we can instead just worry about changing the Y coordinate. So we'll select that, and instead of just setting it to a preset value like 50 or 75 or whatever those other values were on the frame, we're going to go ahead and select the buttons section, hover over position for that button, and we are going to set the arrow's Y position in relation to the Y position of the buttons, and press enter. Now you may be wondering how all this works. I mean, how does it know which button to set the Y position for? Well, the interesting thing about Clickteam is that if it's checking for a specific instance of a button, so let's say, for example, I'm going to go back to my frame editor here, that I'm hovering over this specific button right here. So Clickteam recognizes that I'm hovering over this button in specific. Okay? So it knows that the button that I'm hovering over, it knows its instance value is 1. It knows everything about this specific, this specific instance of the object. Even though we have 4 of the same ones, it knows I'm hovering over this one. Because it knows I'm hovering over this one, it will then allow the arrow to change its values to whatever I'm setting as the Y buttons. I hope I'm explaining this well enough. So basically, I'm going to run the code now. We're not done, but just showing you guys what we've got so far. So now, as you can see, whenever I'm hovering my mouse over the buttons, the arrow now follows along with it because it's checking for which specific button my mouse is going over, and it is setting the arrow's Y position in conjunction to the button's Y position that I am hovering over. Make sense? Now, we're not done yet. I'm sure, as you noticed, whenever my mouse button is not over the buttons, the arrow disappears. We want it to disappear whenever my mouse is not over any of the buttons. So, what we are going to do is make a new condition in this buttons code. And we are going to, actually, here, I'm going to show you guys something, actually. So if you guys remember, I showed you guys a neat little trick of where I could drag a condition of some code and drag it over to the next available line. And we can essentially just make some new code off the basis of this additional line and not have to worry about doing all the setup from before. Now, here's another thing that we can do, which is really interesting. So if we right click on this text in specific, on this condition, we have a few other options here, right? But one of these options is called negate. So if we do that, this X appears. So what this is doing is this is going to check if our mouse pointer is not actually hovering over any of the buttons. And of course, if we right click again and press negate when that X is over there, it cancels that out. So we can, for some conditions, it doesn't work for everything, but it works for a good chunk of them, we can actually negate the specific condition of what we're trying to check for. So this condition is checking for if the mouse is hovering over the button, and this one is checking for if the mouse is not hovering over the button. So it's pretty useful in specific circumstances. So now we're going to add a new condition on top of this. And we're going to actually go over to our arrow this time. And we are going to check for if the arrow is visible. So I think actually we may not even need the focus alter value now that I'm thinking about it. I think it's really only for if we're changing anything with like the button visuals specifically, which we can probably do that on a later date, so we'll keep this for now. But I can show you guys something that we can use that value for. But anyways, this arrow is now visible. It's checking to see if our arrow is visible, which if we have our mouse away from the buttons, and let's say that we just had it over it, and so the arrow would be visible in that case, we're simply going to make it disappear again. So we'll go to arrow, go to visibility, and make it invisible. Now watch what happens when I run the code again. It basically works perfectly now. It is not the most perfect just because there's some empty space, mostly to compensate with the length of the custom night text, but it's fine enough. Besides, I think the buttons being a bit bigger than they should isn't really a very big deal, so you can do with this what you will, but for now, we will call this good. So now that we have our... And also, save all the time. Please save all the time. Clickteam has never really been a big issue with crashing for me specifically. However, that does not mean that it will not cause you problems with crashing as well. I know that for a good friend of mine, Hack Games, who used to use Clickteam a lot, the Genjin crashed a lot for him. So, that in mind, save all the time. But that's also something that could be applied for basically any game engine, so who cares? Okay, so now what we want to do is we want to actually make these buttons clickable. We want to actually have them be doing stuff when we click on them. We are not so much worried about the 6 night and custom night selections right now. We will get to these on a later date once we are actually further along. We are only concerned with the new game and continue buttons because those are kind of like the fundamental buttons of the fan games. So what I'm going to do, I think what I'm going to do, instead of, I was considering about making, I'll go back to my storyboard editor. Remember, this is the window where all of your different frames are, your different levels. I was considering about making a new frame for the newspaper for the new game button, but I thought about it and I'm like, that's not really optimized, so I'll go ahead and show you guys a different way of doing this. So this will also give me an opportunity to learn, to show you guys the layers selection. So, of course, you guys probably have noticed by now I got a layers toolbar. It's not going to automatically be available, I think. So to turn this on, you guys need to go over to View, go over to Toolbars, and then it's going to be this selection called Layers Toolbar. You can also activate it by pressing Control K. Now, normally, whenever you have this turned on, it's going to do this. So it's not always going to be visible. We can do this if we go over to this little pin. We can actually make this stay visible no matter what. It's quite helpful to have this always be pinned here to the right and visible. So anyways, what we're going to do is we're going to make a new layer by pressing this button up here. And if we click on the screen where our new layer is, it will take us to that. Now, some of these options here, I'll explain what these do on a later day, but just know that it's kind of what makes these hide and reappear and stuff. If you need to change what appears in your layers, these little icons like little eye icons, you basically just turn them on and off, and they basically just make the whole layer invisible. So if you need to have this layer invisible, then you can just turn those off. Anyways, we're gonna make a new active object on our new layer, and this is going to be our newspaper. So we're gonna add the newspaper image. I think it's actually in my menu. Yeah, it's right here. Okay, gotta retoggle some of these options off. Make sure that your transparent color is not any of these colors. I won't explain hotspots right now. That's gonna be a bit more complex. That's gonna be a still image, so we are fine with what we have. Gonna resize it to the center of the application. Call it newspaper, of course, because we don't like having unnamed objects in this household. And of course, just a reminder, I like to have some of these options off, so that way a little bit of the game's runtime is not wasted for stuff that it won't be used for. Like follow the frame, destroy object if too far from frame, which is, of course, not going to be... Actually, did I explain these before? Oh, you know what? I don't think I actually talked about these before. Basically, some of these are kind of like self-explanatory. Only ones that aren't really that obvious is use find detection. That's gonna get its own section later, but basically, just know that usually whenever you make new objects, especially active objects, there are usually settings that you wanna like disable. So because some of these add to like runtime. Which basically is what allows the game to perform well. So yeah, don't worry too much about it right now though, especially with the main menu. It's really not that important to have super optimized runtime for the menu specifically. But when we get to the office, that's when I'm really going to start giving y'all lectures on what not to do with leaving these kinds of settings on. So just get ready. Alright, so with the newspaper, we're going to go over to our display options. And right away, we're going to set the transparency, which again is called the blend coefficient or the alpha blending coefficient to 255, which is the max. So basically invisible. And what we're going to do is we are going to check if the player actually clicks on one of the buttons. So we're going to go to the mouse pointer and keyboard, go over to the mouse again, and this time we're going to select user clicks on an object. Before it gives you the list of objects though, it's going to check which button it's going to have you click. Now, you can do either left, middle, or right button. We're going to do left for obvious reasons, and Clickteam actually has an interesting thing where it can detect on if you single click or double click. We can, of course, just do single click because that's easiest. So usually you can just have that on the default settings right away. And we're going to select the buttons because that is what we're checking to see if the user actually clicks on. So, of course, you know, that's not really specific enough because that could be any one of these 4 buttons. You know, we want to only check for if the user is clicking on the new game button so that we can actually activate the newspaper code. Well, what we're going to do is we're going to, or actually, hang on, I need to go to the list editor, sorry. It's not really much different if I do it through the normal event editor, but when I'm doing actions, it's definitely different if I do it through the list editor. So we're going to make a new condition under line 8. We're going to click on the buttons, and we are actually going to select compare to instance value. And we're going to check if the instance value is equal to 1, because remember, that is the instance value that the new game button belongs to. So with that in mind, we are going to make a new action. And we're going to go ahead and I guess, how do we want to, like, toggle this? I'm wondering. We can have the background, I guess. I guess while I'm at it, I did technically not really use this for anything. So what I'm going to go ahead and do is I'm going to show you guys something really cool known as flags, which is going to be found under the values tab as well. Now flags are really interesting because if you just need to have a trigger for something and not an actual value, this is what flags are used for. So we're going to make a new flag and we are going to change the name of it to newspaper. Sure. Again, whatever you want to call it. You can literally call it doo-doo fart, which I'm going to call it that because I think that sounds funny. So what's cool about flags is, you know, they can only be either on or off. If you're a more traditional programmer, you probably know these as booleans. They're basically the same thing. They're just called flags in Clickteam. So now if we go back to the event list editor, we're going to make our new action, go over to our background object, and under flags, we are going to set our newly created doo-doo fart flag on. Now, that isn't the only thing that we're going to do. I'm going to show you guys something really cool that a lot of people probably don't know, even if they use groups of code. So, obviously, if we have the player select one of the buttons, whoops, did not mean to press that, we don't want them to be able to really interact with anything else. We kind of want them to, you know, watch either the newspaper play out and stuff like that. So no need to worry because we can add a new condition on top of that, or a new action, sorry. So if we go over to our special conditions up here, or our special actions, if we hover over a group of events, we can actually completely activate or deactivate a specific group of events. So of course, since we want to prevent the player from doing anything with the buttons after one of them is pressed, we're going to select deactivate. And since buttons is our only group event, group event, we're going to select that, and it is going to turn off. So which means that as soon as the user selects this button, they will not be able to do anything else with the buttons. So, with that in mind, what we are going to do now is check in a new condition if our doo-doo fart flag that we just turned on is on. Pretty easy. And what we're going to do is insert a new action and go over to our newspaper here. And we are going to go over effects. If you guys remember, this is where our transparency for the object is located. Select alpha blending coefficient for transparency. And basically what we're going to do is we are going to make it fade in. Now to do this in Clickteam, it's pretty simple. All we got to do is go over to our newspaper, hover over effect, and retrieve the transparency of it. And then, since 255 is when it's completely invisible, we wanted to subtract itself so that way it then turns fully invisible, which is when it's at 0. So we're going to subtract it like this, and we can have it do it as a number like 5. Because remember, this is every frame since the game is running at 60 frames per second. It's going to be doing this 60 times every second. So we're going to press enter, see how that looks when we run it next. And that's basically it. If you want to be really proficient, we can actually add a new condition on line 9, which actually checks for if the newspaper's transparency is lower or greater or whatever than a specific value. So to do this, actually, we can't just press newspaper and select effects, because wouldn't you know it, there isn't actually an option to do that for the condition specifically. I think it's weird how there isn't an option, but thankfully, if this ever happens, there is a fail-safe for this. So if we go over to our special conditions again, there is a very helpful button for this kind of scenario, which is simply called compare two general values. So if for whatever reason you need to just compare something with an object to a value and it doesn't appear in the default selection of things to check for the object, not all hope is lost. We can instead compare two general values. And what we can do, so we'll it's just going to be two text expressions basically. So it's kind of similar to what we've been doing, except both of the comparisons are going to be texts. So we'll press over to the newspaper for our first one, and we can now select the object's transparency option. Now, since we are constantly subtracting this value from 255 and aren't stopping until it reaches 0, we are going to change our comparator here, or comparison, whatever it's called. We're going to change this to be greater because we're checking for if its transparency is greater than 0. So now we're going to press OK. And now, when we run the code, as soon as we press the new game button, the newspaper should fade in. At least it should be. Set a doo-doo far on. Stally buttons. I promise I know what I'm talking about here. Let's make sure I didn't do anything wrong. Oh, it should be working. That's interesting. Okay. I need to actually, well, this is actually good because this is a learning opportunity for everyone. Because I'm about to show you guys something really useful with the menu bar. So let's go ahead and just run it again. So you guys have probably noticed this menu bar. You know, it's basically just been getting in my way ever since the start of the series. But it's actually very useful because this is our debug menu. And what's sad is most people don't even really utilize it. So, you know, this stuff just seems kind of not useful, right? I mean, it says system, what frame we're on, the time, and then the frames per second. That's not very useful, right? And then also the amount of objects we have and stuff, but you know, that doesn't really matter. However, if we press this button titled Add Object, what we're doing basically is we are adding any of the objects in our frame as part of the debugger, because that's essentially what this window is, a debugger. So we're going to add our background active object, just double click it and it'll add it to the debugger up here. We can now see information on the object and a few other things. So since we are trying to change a flag, I'm going to assume that the reason that what we were just trying to do wasn't working is because the flag probably isn't turning on. So I'm going to click on the flags and I'm going to click on this and well, look at that. It is in fact turning on, so that must mean that my error is actually has something to do with this line right here. So let's see what I have done wrong. I wonder if it just has to do with this. Let me see. Okay, no. And of course, if you have deleted a condition or an action, you can just Control Z and it'll restore it. So I'm wondering why this has decided not to return. Oh, you know what? So I know what I did wrong. So you guys know how I was trying to deactivate this group. This is inside of the same group that I have just deactivated. So, of course, we don't want to undo all of this. So instead what we can do is we can instead just move this entire chunk of code outside of the group by doing this. Boop. But as you can see, if we collapse the group now, it is now outside of it. So now, if we run it again, now it should work. There we go. All right. So that is the newspaper now. So, with that being said, we are now going to make a new condition specifically for when newspaper fully fades in. And instead of making a new condition entirely, we're just going to drag the same code because we're checking for a transparency value. And what we're going to do is we are going to actually right-click on this text and negate. So if you ever have a scenario where you just have two general values that are comparing each other, you can always change the sign entirely by right-clicking and negating it. Now, it should be noted, of course, is if your sign is just a greater or lower than, the sign that it inverts to is not just going to be lower or greater than, depending on what you have. It is going to suddenly include an equal sign, because that is technically the true inverse of that comparator. Does that make sense? Hopefully it does, because I'm not good at explaining these things. Anyways, what we're going to do now is add another new condition. And this time, we're just going to check for if the player left clicks anywhere on the screen. So we're going to go to the mouse and keyboard again, go to the mouse, and just press on the user clicks option, because since we're not checking for if the user clicks on anything in specific, we're just checking for if they use the mouse at all when the newspaper has gone completely visible. So it actually isn't visible here, but this user clicks with left button option is not supposed to be down here. Usually with events like these that are kind of highlighted in my case, blue. I think for, default Clickteam skins, it's a different color. I don't know what color. It's been so long since I've seen a default Clickteam skin before, but basically for colors that are highlighted like this, they're usually supposed to be towards the top of conditions, but this one is not, and it looks a bit weird because it's actually supposed to be trying to tell me that it's in the wrong spot. So what we're going to do is we can just rearrange the order of our conditions by dragging it up like this. Boop, and now it looks normal again. So anyways, what we're going to do is we're going to check for if the user clicks with the left button. Now, normally in FNaF 1, when you do click on the newspaper, it fades into a black screen and then goes into the whole, night transition and everything. But for the sake of simplicity, I'm just going to go ahead and jump straight into the night transition screen. So this is actually going to be our next frame in the storyboard editor. So to make a new one, if you guys don't remember, all you gotta do is click on the next empty number in our list, and voila, we have got a new frame. We will name this the night transition. I'm gonna make this a black background because that's usually what you should do, is mess with a couple of those settings first before you do anything else. And now that is going to be available for us in the next tutorial, because I'm not going to go over that all right now. That will be for next time. But before we finish off, we're going to just quickly insert an action here. And we are going to go over to the storyboard controls, which I'm sure you guys probably know what this handles. It actually handles more than just going to different frames. It actually handles a good number of other things too. So, yeah, there's actually a whole lot of different things that can be altered. But right now, we only care about this option called Jump to Frame. Now, you could say, well, we could just use next frame or previous frame, right? Well, I do not recommend doing that, and the reason is, let's say that you make a frame and logically you decide to put it in between some other frames. If those frames happen to have anything that has next frame or previous frame, then your ordering is going to get all messed up. So I only recommend you using jump to frame, because even if the positioning changes, it will specifically look for that one frame no matter where it's located on the list. So we're going to double click this to select it. And as soon as that left button is pressed, I will show you guys now actually. But yeah, other thing too, if you are going to be testing things that involve multiple frames, make sure to run the whole application, which is going to be this button here. You can also press F8. And if you're only running it through just one frame, then it's more optimal to just run the whole frame, because that takes less time to load the application, since you're only looking for just one frame in the whole thing. So we're going to press new game, wait for our newspaper to fade in. We're going to left click, and we are now at our second frame, as you can tell, because our frame number is now 2. Timer reset, and everything just went away in general. So I'm going to exit out the application, and before I call it quits for this tutorial, I'm going to go ahead and do something else. Now, if you guys remember, if we right click on our text, we got all these different options. Something that I want to expose people to as well are these two little options. They're both OR. I'm sure you guys probably know what OR means. Now you may be wondering what the difference between these two are. Now, it's a bit complicated to talk about this right now, since we don't really need to be using one of them at all. But just know that for now, the best one to use for a scenario like this is going to be the one that has logical in parentheses. So we're going to press that one, and it's actually not in the right spot at all. You want to have the two lines of code that are supposed to be checked with one another be not separated by an OR statement. So, I wonder if you can actually... Okay, does not look like you can do it through here. Okay, just wanted to see. So now what we're going to do is we're going to add a new condition now. And instead, we're going to once again check... Well, actually, we can probably just... let me see. Yeah, so we're going to reopen this again. And we're going to drag this over to 11. Now, you may be thinking, well, Matt, didn't you just say that these events highlighted in blue need to be up first? Well, it works because what we're doing is we're basically allowing for two separate events to be checked in just one line of code. It saves a good amount of, it just makes it look nicer. It's not super required, but it does help make things look nicer. Because what we're doing now in this second event is we are basically checking for if the user selects the continue game button. So we're going to drag our instance, I just did this anyways, but drag the instance value code where it checks the instance value of the button over to line 11, which is where all this is going on. And check for the instance value if it is 2, which is what our continue button is equal to. Because, as I'm sure you guys know, if you press on the continue game button in FNaF 1, it just jumps you straight to the night transition. So, take a look at this. If we press on continue, actually I need to run the whole application. I just said that I was supposed to be doing that. If we press the continue button, we go right over to the night transition as well. And just to show you guys that this works in full, I'm going to press the new game button and left click. Boom. Works for both scenarios. If it got a bit confusing there, hopefully, if you guys need me to really explain some of these better, I'll try to do that in the next video. But I also understand that some people can, well, not just some people, but everyone can pause the video and go back if they need to. I have faith that you guys can understand all of what's going on. I know that it's kind of a lot to go over for just the first 2 videos here. But we have essentially just made for the most part, functioning menu. Of course, there is a lot of stuff that we still need to be doing. For starters, we need the stars. We need to do the 6th night and custom night. We need to do some other thing that I don't know. Oh yeah, obviously save files and whatnot, saving the nights and whatnot. But, this is, like I said, all just the beginning of the process. If this is your first time just trying to make something, you've probably already yeah, I don't know what I was gonna go with that. My mind blanked. You guys can tell that I'm really tired. I'm recording this at 9 p.m. after a very long shift at work, but it's the only way that I can do this. So, in any case, thank you guys for watching. I appreciate you guys just taking time out of your day and watching this goofy little video of mine. Once again, if you need me to explain anything that I didn't really do a very good job of explaining, which is probably going to be a good chunk of this stuff, then you can let me know in the comments. I will try my best to clarify any questions that you guys have. And of course, if you have any questions on just anything in general with Clickteam, even if it's as simple as how do I do this specific thing, or hey, what does this do? I will answer your guys' questions in the comments and do my best. So anyways, thank you guys for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.